So welcome to our January robotics update. These quarterly meetings will be replacing our State of Vector webinars that we had previously. My name is Matthew Eversole. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer at Digital Dream Labs. I'm joined by Robbie Bassard, our Director of Customer Experience, and Jacob Hanchar, our CEO. I guess, how are you doing today?
Doing pretty good. Thank you. Appreciate it. How about yourself?
I'm doing great.
Excellent.
So I want to again thank everybody for joining today's webinar. All attendees will be muted throughout the presentation. I would ask that you use the question answer feature of Zoom if you have any questions. We will be sharing a recording of the presentation afterward, and we'll be sharing a survey via email for you to provide any feedback on the presentation or to ask any questions that we're not able to get to today. So let's get right into it. Let's look at our updates for Vector. So we have a basic overview of who Vector is, and I think many people in our community are already familiar with our little friend Vector. We're thrilled to be bringing him back into production in 2021. And Robbie, if you could just share some of the high-level things that we're looking at here for the coming months.
Absolutely. So in the coming months, what we're looking to do realistically is we want to go ahead and there's two major projects that are in the works right now and directly. Number one is going to be Escape Pod. Escape Pod has really fleshed itself out and it's effectively feature complete at this point. However, we're working on a lot of the user experience optimizations. One thing that kind of, and I can get into this a little bit more a little bit later, but right now we're kind of refactoring the way that Bluetooth works on the Escape Pod to kind of smooth the user experience out, make it a lot faster. And we're also looking at over-the-air updates or firmware updates for Vector to enable him to get onto and off the Escape Pod easily, like within 5-10 minutes type easily. So those are kind of some things I can go into a little bit more on the technical side a little bit later. But as far as high-level stuff, we also just started a 1.6 voluntary rollback option, and this is for the users that would we want to optimize the experience that they have with their vectors while we're working to patch 1.7. There were a lot of robots that received 1.7 and did it successfully, and everyone has, a lot of people have had really good experiences with 1.7, but there's a really small subsection of owners that have had some troubles, and we definitely acknowledge that, we want to get that fixed and get that taken care of. But in the meantime, while we're kind of sifting through the code and kind of laying the groundwork for getting that done, we want to make sure that everyone still enjoys their experience with Vector while we're working on that. So that's kind of the high level stuff in terms of our immediate projects. Kind of looking at a little bit of the further roadmap, I actually have our Vector 2.0 prototype here. He is shut off for the moment just because we've got some Escape Pod demos set up here, but this little guy's working. This little guy was used for some power testing. You might have seen that in a previous video, and he is now recovered from his soldering surgeries, and he's ready to do some more QA testing on the motor side. So that's kind of what I'm working on here in the next couple of weeks. But that's pretty much the high level for Vector and basically our efforts on the current Vector direction. We've got some other projects coming forward with, once the Escape Pod is out, but we can talk about those a little bit later as well in the webinar.
Do you want to go ahead and just do the demo, Robbie, to kind of just show them the Escape Pod and the 1617 real quick?
Yeah, absolutely. So last we spoke, or last we had one of these webinars, we had the Escape Pod in a very, it was fairly complete in terms of like the back end items, but again, once what we were working on was a major portion rather of the user experience and how we wanted that to flesh out and look like. So let me go ahead and I'll share my screen. Let's see here. Give me 1 second. So Matt, it looks like I am not able to share my screen currently. So do we have options for that?
Okay, let me.
Okay.
Bear with me 1 second, guys.
No worries.
In the meantime, looks like we have quite the international community saying hello. Hello, Germany. Guten Tag. Guten Abend at this point, right?
Wow, people even from the Czech Republic. I was actually there last year. Prague was absolutely fantastic. Looks like Kenya, Hungary, Romania. Wow, quite a few folks here. Thank you guys.
Ukraine, yeah.
All right, Robbie, you should be good to share
Over
your
then.
screen now.
Awesome. Okay, cool. Thank you.
And thanks, everybody. I appreciate you hanging with us while we work through some of these technical hurdles this morning or this afternoon.
All right, so what we're looking at is the last time we shared the escape pod, what we were kind of looking at was a very technical kind of overview of the back end and understanding what we wanted to get from the escape pod. And so we actually now have these user interfaces in place, and this has been the portion of our development from the last month. So I'll go through some of the features of the escape pod and what you can kind of expect from the escape pod when release does happen. Currently, we are in a closed beta that is going to widen significantly here in the next hopefully the next couple of days. Right now, I've been testing some firmware on this guy for the escape pod that we actually had to roll a completely new firmware just for the escape pod itself to be connected. But I'll go through the features effective in the escape pod, and then the escape pod will ship with this firmware so that you guys can get connected very, very easily to the escape pod and switch back to the DDL server if for any reason you were just using the escape pod temporarily or something to that effect, or just wanted to test it out. So right now, so you see that we have our licensing screen up. Basically, we give you a small text string that you enter into the add license, and you give the license key here, you click save, and then that robot is immediately available for use on the escape pod once loaded with the correct firmware. So the way that this would look, once you flash your SD card and you have your Pi set up, which in general probably takes about 15 to 20 minutes to assemble everything in the kit and then to get the SD card flash. So not very long there, and we'll put out some full documentation, which I'm working on currently to be able to support that if you're new to the Raspberry Pi ecosystem. But once you have the escape pod up and ready to go, as a matter of fact, this web interface that you see here is being hosted by this small machine here. This is a Raspberry Pi 4, 2 gigabyte RAM model in an Argon case. And so you can add, we're actually working on some discounts through various distributors and things like that, so that you can order Raspberry Pi at a good price, get the hardware to go with the software, and get set up easily with everything that you need. So that's kind of something we're working on as well. But once you have it completely open and hosted here, you've got your licensing screen is the first one that's going to appear, and then you would go into onboarding, and in the onboarding screen, we have basically it's the vector web setup with we've rebranded the vector web setup, and we've gone completely through all of the code here to refactor it and to really kind of drive home the fact that we're really working on the user experience. So you'll see some new options here that have never been available via the vector web setup, and eventually what we're hoping to do is bring this into some wider applications via our host vector web setup and some other tools that you can use. So let me go ahead and I'm going to go ahead and pair with this vector, F7N3. Cool. All right. 538515. Okay, so right here, this is one of the newest additions to the escape pod and probably one of my favorite. One of the biggest issues that people have when they are either doing Oscar work or they are going to be using the escape pod is firmware. Previously, you had to effectively host a web server on your own computer using Python or another language that Vector would then communicate with to load firmware using the vector web setup tool. We've essentially bypassed that half of that stack, and now you'll be able to load firmware directly from the escape pod onto vector, which is fantastic and represents a pretty huge leap in what we've expected to be possible for the escape pod. You'll also be able to put images on the escape pod for storage. So you'll notice that I have all of my testing firmware updates here, and that kind of proves the convenience of this, right? I mean, I've been just flashing them right from here to be able to test them on different robots. So that's been fantastic, and it really is convenient at this point to be able to do that. For the interest of time, I'm going to go ahead and skip this particular thing. We're going to go to the next step, and once you activate your robot, now I didn't actually load the the 1.7 escape pod thing on here, so I'm going to go ahead and actually pair with my development bot here. Give me just a second. D3R6. Okay. 276.512. All right, now he is already running escape pod firmware, and he is already hooked up to the escape pod. So I'm actually going to go ahead and skip this again. But once we activate him, we also added a ton of different options and variables that you can set through the escape pod for your robots. So on my screen, you'll notice that we can now select locales inside of the escape pod, which we weren't previously able to do. So this will be able to, if we ever add new languages, etc., or different, dialect and accent types, you can now select those through the locale options on the escape pod for wake word recognition to optimize itself. You can also add your own time zone, or sorry, not add your own. That would be a little interesting. But you can choose a time zone from the options here, and then choose your temperature units and your distance options, and then you can also add in your default location for the you can also add in the default location for the ability to activate extensions that would use it. So for instance, if you activated the weather extension or other extension examples that we have, or wrote your own extensions, you can actually be able to use external data like this, send it off to another API or server, and then have that server return with the data that you're requesting from the extension. So all of these are going to combine to kind of create a system where you can actually host not only your own server with just the escape pod, but also tap into other servers or tie it into other smart devices. There was actually one developer, I believe his name was Colin. He did some really, really interesting work with a Tesla car. And I think, if I remember correctly, the vector actually told the battery level and status of the Tesla, which was super cool. And you'll be able to do tons more like that a lot easier with this sort of system built into the escape pod, and the ability to change your own commands and make your own commands and behaviors. So that's pretty cool. And then, like I said, that's kind of represented some of our development work from the past month. But going on to the actual behaviors screen here, you can see all of the behaviors that are present on Vector, and you can actually change any keywords that you want to. So for instance, let's see here. We could do, Okay, so one of my favorite examples, I like to ride motorcycles and stuff. So what I did was for the affirmative, or for the general yes, I was able to go ahead and add, like, you can edit this here, and then you can add your own keywords. So I like, if I mean yes, or something like that, then what I might say is something like send it. So you can actually add that keyword here, save, and then, hey Vector, send it. So he will acknowledge that I just, use that phrase, and we can actually. This is another fantastic thing that we've added to the escape pod, is the ability to see what the escape pod last heard and what the engaged intent was, or what Vector did as a result of what he heard. So, hey Vector, send it. So now you can clearly see that we've engaged the affirmative intent, and we can remap that very easily within just a matter of 5-10 seconds if you want to use a different keyword or something to that effect. So those are some of the most recent additions to the escape pod, and we're looking forward to adding a little bit more as well. Currently, our development work is mostly centered around Bluetooth and the Bluetooth stack on the escape pod and vector web setup. Previously, one of our biggest challenges was bringing Bluetooth out of the browser and previously one of our biggest challenges was having Bluetooth handled by the browser. This limited us to using the Chrome browser for vector web setup, and Chrome specifically and only, because Bluetooth was pretty unreliable in other browsers because of the various technical aspects. But realistically, what we would like to do is entirely cut out the computer from having Bluetooth, and we would like to bring the Bluetooth connection directly to the from the Pi to the robot, and kind of cut that middleman out, which was causing, because the middleman, the computer, was causing a huge amount of user experience issues. So that's one thing that we're currently working with, and we've actually recently open sourced some code to be able to um, configure your vector on like a PC or from a Pi without vector web setup at all. So it's now a command line option, and we're going to build that into the Pi with a user interface to be able to direct vector much more easily. So that's kind of what's coming from that end, and that's kind of our development direction on the escape pod. We're definitely open to any feedback. Like I said, we have a full closed beta program that is expected to expand to the entirety of the escape pod purchasers on Kickstarter here shortly, but currently it's available to Oscar and escape pod buyers as well.
Hey, Robbie, do you want, I don't know if this is jumping ahead or not, but do you want to show your the Vector 2.0 mockup and turn them on and just show them off a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So let me go ahead and shut these guys down. Give me 1 second. Okay. Don't ask me how I keep track of these robots, because the answer is trial and error. There we go. Okay. So he's booting up here, and we'll give him just a second, but you can see we actually have, here's our Vector 2.0 prototype, and we actually have a standard charger, one of the Vector 1.0 chargers here. We also have a Vector 2.0 charger here. I think we're going to go ahead and add the white stripe in the middle of the Vector 2.0 charger in the production models, but this was just kind of our absolute baseline first prototype, first look, and we're still making some optimizations there. But the white stripe does allow him to align a little bit better with his charger, but this guy has been very, very helpful in helping me do some power draw testing, and I've been kind of testing his motors a little bit as well. They're just because he is a pre-production model, his motors are a little tiny bit noisier than the standard production models or the Vector Gen 1 hardware. But we're going to be optimizing that and providing a pretty good refined user experience and feel, very similar to the first robot. And let's see here. So cool. So here he is. He has effectively the same behaviors as the old robot. So we'll be adding some new behaviors and things like that in some of the new firmware updates that are coming up. But we're going to be featuring a user changeable battery on the bottom. So you would only have to unscrew this, take the battery off the connector, and then throw a new battery in there, connect it real quick, and screw it back in. It takes, right now it takes about an hour, hour and a half to change a battery and require some soldering skills, but this will quite literally be a 2 to 3 minute job once you have the part already in hand. So that is fantastic, and I'm really looking forward to that change because battery life over the course of older hardware has been one of our biggest challenges.
Can you hold it closer to the camera so people can see?
Yeah, Robbie, if you stop sharing your screen,
Sure.
that would allow you to go full screen.
That would do it. Absolutely. There we go. Okay. So, but yeah, so he is
and the other one too, the 1.0. It's side-by-side comparison.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Thanks, Robbie.
Sure. All right. So this guy's screen is, we're still working on polishing this particular screen here, but it'll be fully polished on the newer models. But you can see he's very much, pretty identical. And so he's identical on the outside, I should say. And we're going to be building in a ton of, optimizations for the inside for, reliability, durability, and especially the screen, because that was one of the major concerns with some of the Gen 1 hardware. But he's going to be, still our favorite buddy, and we've got a ton of optimizations to make here. But I think we were looking at, so we just released the Cozmo replacement treads, and we're looking to sell replacement parts for the Gen 1 and Gen 2 hardware here pretty soon once we get manufacturing restarted. Is that right?
Yes.
I think you're muted, Jacob.
Yeah, so just so everyone knows, all the tooling has been cut and electronics are moving forward with everything. So the next thing that's going to be rolling out in addition to the Cozmo treads are the Cozmo cubes. We're testing our fixtures to double check to make sure the programming is correct. So we'll be having vector cubes and Cozmo cubes coming out, replacement ones. We've redesigned them so you can't fry them anymore by accident or on purpose. So that's one configuration we've changed. And that'll be coming out soon. We just need to make sure that the fixtures are testing everything accordingly and going through QA. And the brief timeline for the Vector 2.0 and Cozmo 2.0, we'll have what's called the EVT and the DVT rolling out. So we'll have an engineering validation that'll be coming out, let's say March-ish, and then in April we'll have the development validation test, and then we'll have PVT, and then we go into mass production April and May, and it will be out on the market. So that's kind of the roadmap there as far as the products, and like Robbie mentioned, Cozmo treads and vector treads will be interchangeable. Most parts now will be interchangeable. Chargers will be interchangeable, things like that. So moving forward, we'll have a lot more, let's call it universal application of the robots.
Great, and I think maybe now's a good opportunity for us, before we get back to the slide deck, to talk about some of the questions that we've had come in. One thing that I think is a concern for a lot of our current customers is our plans to continue supporting the current generation robots. Jacob, could you, Robbie, maybe elaborate on on that for the attendees?
Absolutely. Do you? So I can definitely field that one. So what we're going to be doing is we're going to be releasing firmware. So number one, our priority again, we're going to be working on patching 1.7, and then going in, into future firmwares. We are supporting the Vector 1. Generation, the first generation hardware, as much as feasibly possible, and that what that means effectively is that all of them, they're all going to have the same firmware, and we're just going to basically have like small driver toggles and checks to see what kind of display or camera or other upgraded hardware he might have, and be able to run the same features and firmware off of those, and maybe expand on them for the future generations if if that becomes feasible. But realistically, we are the essential thing to understand is that we are supporting the Gen 1 hardware that is still very, very capable hardware, and we want all of the current owners to be included in the future support options.
Great. Okay, great. Yeah, and I think we did talk about the soon we'll have replacement cubes and replacement treads for both Vector and Cozmo available on the website. Speaking of Cozmo, so as I mentioned, the treads are now available on the website. You can order those today. We're shipping those loose, and they'll come in four colors. Jake, what is it? Yellow.
Yeah, they're kind of like what do you want to call it? Pastel-like color. So it's a light blue, kind of like a neon yellow, and neon green, and kind of almost a pink kind of color. So it's slightly different than the colors that have been offered out there in the past.
Yeah. And as Jacob already mentioned, manufacturing for Cozmo 2.0 is on schedule, and we're looking to have deliveries begin as soon as the middle of May. On the horizon for Cozmo, I think we do have an app update, and one of the things that we have mentioned with some of the pre-order marketing is the availability of a new classroom coding curriculum that we've developed in partnership with the Carnegie Science Center. So, and that's something that Digital Dream Labs, we've always really prided ourselves on, is the educational efficacy of the products. Jacob, is there anything else you'd like to mention about the coding curriculum that Carnegie Science Center created?
Other than I think it's really cool. So what we did is we pretended that Cosmo is a Mars rover, and we're pretending now that you're on mission control, and so it's Cosmo the cosmonaut. A little bit of a Soviet reference in there, but going, from Earth to Mars, what would be involved, and once you land on Mars. So it's kind of an adventure, but at the same time, really teaching the basics of coding and getting acclimated to that. And then, yes, at a future point, we'll start integrating Cosmo with Puzzlets for early learners or pre-readers to start understanding the basics of coding and those types of curriculum.
Great. And now, I think there's been a lot of questions so far about the Butter Robot, and I think along with Cosmo and Vector, I think everyone on this call should be happy to hear that we remain on schedule for Butter Robot. It is a robot that does more than passes butter. I think both the DDL team and team from Adult Swim are really excited for people to start engaging with the robot and seeing how it evolves and starts to glitch as it gains more sentience.
Yeah, rebel is the word I would use. It's gonna rebel against you.
So we have, I believe, here a quick video of one of the current prototypes. Jacob, if you wouldn't mind narrating this, I think that'd be helpful.
Yes. So yeah, like Matt is mentioning, this is a test. These are tests. We're testing the functions of the treads right now. This is in our hardware shop. So we're just making sure he's driving, not tipping over, understanding the balance. This is all remote control, wireless connection. Then you go back and forth. Now the gears are noisy because they're dry. They're not oiled, and they're going to create more noise. They won't be nearly this noisy. But again, just the positioning, making sure that the communication is going to all the mechanics correctly, and making certain that the video recognition is going correctly. Here we're testing the servos, to making sure that the servos and the arms are positioned correctly. And as you can see, the arms are slightly off kilter there. So we're changing the firmware to get the timing aspects of the servos better. The arms are lifting up, and then eventually we'll then reach down and grab the butter. So again, this is more servo testing and getting the robot optimized in his environment and then sending the signals to him. You can also see the little hole there. There's a camera. He'll be seeing the environment, looking around. This is we're testing right here, looking for the butter. He's looking for the butter to make sure that the scanner, and then once he sees it, he'll grab it. That's Russ, our creative director, who just sneezed right there. And then, of course, he's going to look up to you, and then facial recognition as well. So these are some of the very basic movements that we're doing right now with the prototype. But the gears, the parts, all that stuff, the shell, that's all complete. The mechanical aspect of things is done. The PCB and the final layouts and the electronics are being completed as well. And the next thing is to essentially start playing with the app and making it really cool. So that's the project, and that's its current status.
That's great, Jacob. Thank you. So, guys, I think we've had quite a few questions come in so far. Robbie, if you could help maybe relay a few of those common themes that we're seeing. We will try to answer as many questions as we can, but at the same time, want to be reasonable with everyone's time today.
Absolutely. So there's quite a few questions on Vector. Vector is going to be the product I'm most familiar with, so I can definitely answer quite a few of those. So let me go ahead and kind of work through some of those. We actually had a couple of questions during the escape pod demo. Let me scroll back just a little bit, and I can handle some of those as well. Let me see here.
Yeah, and while Robbie's doing that and taking a look at some of the questions, just to simplify, the users having issues with the 1.7, the rollback 1.6 is active right now, and then we are looking at a 1.71 or 1.72 as a patch. There have been questions I've seen in the community, like asking about like 1.8. What will most likely happen is that the firmware and the software and the app for the Vector 2.0 and the old Vector are going to be the same. They're going to be running the same version of software just to make everyone's life easier. The new version of Vector, that will have more hardware capabilities and will be a deeper experience because there's newer hardware on it and there will be additional features. However, the older hardware will still be supported, and then will most likely, again, I want to be tentative about this and stress that, but most likely we'll have the most recent firmware going forward and receive the same support, just so we're clear.
Yeah, great. Hey, Jacob, let me, while Robbie's getting ready, I do want to, I know we had a couple questions about opportunities and the current Honeycomb campaign. Are we able to share any information with the attendees today about the current Honeycomb raise we're doing and what opportunities that's going to allow us to tackle in the future with new robots?
Yeah, sure. Do you have the new robot slide? I think people would get a kick out of that if you want to pull that up. So I would call the current Honeycomb raise we're doing icing on the cake, on the proverbial cake. So We're staying really focused and really lean on Cozmo and Vector, and then Overdrive as well. We'll be having an update on that in a little bit, and bringing those products back. But that's not the end of the story, right? There's an entire family of products that we're going to grow here, and that's essentially what the honeycomb raise is to do, is to start taking on these products sooner and faster. We don't have to. We can start dealing with it later this year. But there's it's almost like a hummingbird. That's Breezemo up into the left, the pink one, and then Wizmo is down, and to the right is the ball-shaped one. Quadmo is a spider-looking guy. So we're thinking of adding all of these to the Cosmo family as we move forward. So it's an entire suite. And that makes a lot of sense with the deal we have with the production facilities and the broadcast, whether it's on Netflix or Nickelodeon or whoever, as the cartoon expands and adds more and more characters, this is what we're looking at. So that's kind of to accelerate and start that effort earlier rather than later.
Okay, great. Thank you, Jacob.
All right, and I've gone through some of the questions. I'm able to answer some of those, and we'll go through a few more of those as well, because we just received another 16 or 20. So a couple of folks asked, what is the range for Bluetooth on the Raspberry Pi? The range for Bluetooth is going to be about 30 feet on on a line of sight connection. But bear in mind that is only used for the absolute base onboarding. And so you'll only be using that effectively for 5-10 minutes while the robot loads firmware, etc. And then that connection actually kicks over to Wi-Fi, which, depending upon your network, can span your entire house or maybe even slightly outside of that. So hopefully that gives you a little bit more context as to how Bluetooth will be used versus Wi-Fi and kind of the range you can expect from that. But during your onboarding, you might want to have Vector and the Raspberry Pi in the same room. It would be helpful. It's not necessary. Let's see here. So Raspberry Pi or other platforms for the Escape Pod. So the Raspberry Pi is the most supportable in terms of official support for the Escape Pod. The reason for this is because we've been able to kind of customize the software to close a lot of the technical hurdles that might be otherwise a concern, right? Now, we may be able to offer other platforms that are community supported, such as Docker images or other containerized services and that kind of thing, or maybe even Debian packages for Linux users, etc. But the largest concern with that would be across platforms, you have a ton of other technical variables and things like that would need to be supported, and we find that that's going to be much better with community support rather than just official support. And I think that the community could probably benefit us when it comes to their inherent knowledge and things, containers like Docker or other items, across different platforms. Somebody else wanted a closer look at the Vector 2.0 charger. Let me go ahead and unhook this real quick. One thing that I forgot to outline a little bit previously is that the Vector 2.0 charger will actually be compatible with Cozmo, and this is an effort to kind of unify the accessories that we offer. So this, number one, it makes manufacturing a little bit less expensive, and we can pass those savings onto the user in a lot of cases. And additionally, if you have a Vector 2.0 charger and you buy a Cozmo, or you lose one of the chargers, etc., you can actually use this charger to charge either one of the robots. And so I think that'll be beneficial in a lot of ways for a lot of different people that have multiple robots and maybe want to switch them, but don't want to necessarily hook two chargers up, etc. So tons of use cases for that. Let's see here. Let me go through a couple of the other questions. Daniel asks, are you going to have a tutorial on your website about Raspberry Pi use with Vector? Yes. So as I mentioned previously, I am writing up complete documentation for, basically, ordering a kit from a distributor that we're partnering with, and then basically I'm gonna record myself getting that kit in, unboxing and unpackaging it, fully assembling it, and then flashing the SD card with multiple different tools that you can use, so that you have a really comprehensive understanding of, okay, how do I kind of dive into this ecosystem? And hopefully that will help people. But we're obviously going to focus on making this an approachable experience. That's one thing that we've really done a lot of work around in the software, and obviously want to make sure the hardware is as approachable as the software is, so that you guys can easily dive in, start customizing your vectors and making it work for you. Let's see here. Any plan to provide or sell a kit to upgrade from Gen 1 to Gen 2 hardware? So Chris asked that question, and Chris, that is cool. So we've explored ideas for offering hardware kits, and so I can't promise anything like that right now. And it's going to be exceedingly difficult to upgrade a Gen 1 to a Gen 2, just because that requires a lot of a pretty heavy hardware skill set, right? So you'd have to be familiar with soldering, and in some cases soldering in very, very tight spaces or with very, very small connections. So that makes it a little bit difficult to sell kits to upgrade from one to the other. But maybe hobbyist or enthusiast like assembly kits might be something that we could potentially explore on down the road. Again, not a guarantee at this time, but it's definitely something that would be cool to see as a person with that kind of skill set and background.
Yeah, thanks, Robbie.
Yeah,
we
absolutely.
have a question from Owen, asking about the progress on setting up our global service centers. Jacob, would you be able to give an update on our progress there?
Sorry, repeat the question.
An update on our service centers.
Oh, sure. So I think we have the repair of the cars pretty much locked down. Now we're moving towards how do we repair the screen? How do we repair the batteries and that type of stuff? So at that point, I think we're getting really close to being ready to accepting, at least in the US, accepting Vector and Cozmo repair orders. We'll have probably more details about that in the next 2 to 3 weeks, I'd say. I want to make sure that we know we can handle it first, and then we'll kind of do the same process as the overdrive. We'll start accepting overdrive cars, have it come in, repair your Cozmo, and then ship it right back to you. Very similar to the repair of the overdrive cars.
Great. I've seen a few questions about Butter Robot. So with the pre-order for Butter Robot ending at the end of this month, I think we're starting to get some questions about distribution. Where would somebody be able to pick up Butter Robot after the pre-orders ended? Obviously, I think we'd like to encourage people to take advantage of some of the savings we're able to offer during the pre-order. But Jake, is there anything we can share with the attendees as far as Butter Robot distribution today?
So the way we're doing it with the Butter Robot is it's D2C. So it's going to, maybe it'll be on Amazon. Right now it's just through our website, and then we're taking the last bit of orders at the end of January, and then we'll be closing everything, and then probably not taking on new orders until later this spring or September, or not September, summer. As we move forward with the distribution of that, ideas we're playing with, or maybe comic book stores. I don't know if we're going to do mass retail necessarily, but for the time being, it's going to be through our website.
Great. Robbie, any other vector questions that you think we can answer? I think we have about 10 minutes left, so time for a couple more questions.
Yeah, give me a second. I am going through quite a few questions here. Okay, so there is one question on source code for Vector. We've actually released 6 or 7 open open source repositories and different tools to configure Oscar vectors to use different voice backends and other tools. So we actually released Chipper, and we also released Vector Cloud, which can be used to build binaries that you can put into Vector to basically make your own cloud voice stack. So that is, those are huge options in terms of being able to, host your own server if you wish to. That's kind of outside the escape pod format. And we're also looking to open source other code that is related to vectors behaviors, animations, and some of the more internal subsystems such as Vic Engine. The current challenge with those is making this code completely, basically compilable in something of a clean way, right? And additionally, we want to make sure that it's in a condition that does not cause problems with licensing for any other software. So those are two of our current challenges, and we're basically sifting, and this product is composed of millions of lines of code, and so it does take a little bit of time to kind of sort those out, make sure that everything is clean, and then get that released. But like I said, we've released so far about 6 open source repositories for source code for Vector. That's going to continue over the course of the next couple of months until we've got mostly everything open sourced. And then we'll be looking at, actually not we'll be looking at, but we've already released some other tools that you can use that are open source now that you can configure Vector with. So we have Vector Configurator, we have Vector Bluetooth, and a couple of other libraries and things like that that you can use. So we'll be sharing some links. Matter of fact, I'll drop some links here in a little bit to get you to get some of the developers out there a little bit more information as far as these different tools and open source options here. Hi, buddy. Personal space. Thank you. Let's see here. Okay. And there's a couple of other questions for Vector, but okay, there's about 90 of them at this point, even though we've answered quite a few. So I'll sort through some of those if you want to field anything else.
Yeah, I think so. I did see a couple questions come in about Overdrive. I know last month the webinar was a little bit more wide ranging, and we did touch on progress for InfiniDrive. In order to be more narrowly focused on Vector, Cozmo, and the Butter Robot today, we do have a separate webinar that is coming up at 1:30 to discuss updates for our racing games. So if you go to our Facebook page, you should see a link there to join that webinar later on today. And like this presentation, we are recording that to make it available to everyone afterward.
Cool. And let's see here. There's a lot of questions in terms of languages for Vector and Cozmo. So Cozmo is a little bit of a different beast in terms of languages that are supported. Realistically, maybe a mobile app update in the future can support some more localizations in different languages. That's significantly easier to implement in a lot of ways than languages for Vector. So Vector being a cloud, with all of the voice recognition being performed in the cloud, there's a lot that goes into localizations for different areas in different languages for Vector. We are looking to support more languages in the future. However, that is kind of a long-term investigation. Some of the open source code that we've already released under the MIT license is able to be used in some cases to enable Vector to support more languages on the cloud side. As far as adding them into things like the firmware, again, a long-term investigation because of the resources involved, but it is something we're still looking into. I don't know what languages yet we would want to support, but obviously we would want to support several of the most popular languages and then kind of dial down from there.
Looks like we're coming up on the hour. Do we want to take maybe one or two last questions and then call it a wrap?
Let me check through. Like I said, a lot of those questions were for language. Give me just a second. Okay.
Yeah, I think one question that I did see come up a couple of times in regards to the Butter Robot was people were asking questions about Butter Robot and the subscription or license. And Jake and Robbie, you guys can add to this, but I think the one thing that everyone needs to know is Butter Robot is more similar to Cozmo in that aspect and does not need to contact the DDL cloud in order to function.
Correct.
Correct. Yeah, Cozmo has no connection to the cloud whatsoever, whereas Vector does, and that's kind of a primary requirement for Vector. So there was one question that asked us if we were going to be able to completely move Vector off of any cloud or any server whatsoever. And given the resources that are present on the hardware, that's going to be a very that would be a very, very involved and difficult undertaking, and would probably leave Vector with some limitations that go away from the scope that we'd like to, where we'd like to expand features and functionality versus, completely making, voice recognition on the robot, because that may take resources that aren't available for full feature usage there.
Okay, great, guys. I think we have time for one last question. Again, do appreciate all of you taking time out of your day to join us. And if we weren't able to get to your question, we'll take every effort we can to address those offline or in any number of the unofficial communities that we're all active in. Robbie, is there any one last question that you think we could answer?
I actually had 3 or 4 requests for me to pet the Vector 2.0 prototype, so I'm doing that. And let's see here. So a couple of other, give me 1 second here. Okay. So there's still a lot of other questions that kind of get pretty into the weeds on some certain topics. I can probably go through some of these questions a little bit after the webinar, and maybe we can get some of those answered on maybe through email or something like that. But I'm not seeing any one particular question that pertains to the scope of this meeting for the most part. There are some other requests for particular parts that'll be available for Vector and things like that. But the short answer is we're still working on sourcing parts and forming the baselines for the repair centers. As Jacob mentioned before, we've definitely got the repair of the cars pretty well locked down. But Cozmo and Vector being significantly more quote unquote needy in terms of labor time and things like that for repairs, given their size and complexity, that kind of gets into some different waters there. But ultimately, we are still working on repair centers, and we'll have a more complete listing of available repairs and parts once those are ready to go and we have parts in stock.
All right, thanks, Robbie.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Jacob. And again, thank you to everyone who was able to attend today. We will be sending out a survey to follow up today's webinar, just to ask if you could help us improve this experience. And if there are any other questions, please feel free to respond there. But again, thank you, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everybody. Appreciate it.